Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I and you and anybody who's watching this learns about him through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by a special guest co-host. I do have Robot Lady here with us, but I've turned her off for now because we have something superior to Robot Lady, an actual person, and not only any person, Sandy, in the flesh, or in the digital flesh, as you will. Sandy, welcome aboard again.
Thanks, Jeff.
It's good to have
It
you
was
here.
fun last time. Come
Yes.
back.
Yes. I think you're the first person to come on and work your way through the letters with me. So that's cool. Welcome. This is the first time, so you get to... Well, I mean, technically, Tayo hopped on one of my very first ones that I did way back just to say hi, and I think to help me feel like I wasn't alone out here. So, technically, Tayo is the first person to jump on with me. And then Daniel jumped in for... Daniel's in the chat, by the way. Hey, Daniel. Daniel says, hey, Sandy, in the chat. All of a sudden, for some reason, I cannot make the chats pop up again. Anyway, I can see them. I can't bring them up on the screen. Daniel joined whenever we were working our way through Boxen, the imaginary world that the young C.S. Lewis put together with his brother, and it was a pretty fascinating work to make our way through. But yes, you are the first to join for the letters, and I know you're on a time crunch, so I won't belabor us any longer. Is there anything that you'd like to say or ask before we get started?
No, not that's right front of my mind. No.
Okay, no worries. I guess where we left off, I can start there. The last two episodes, Lewis was giving various accounts of what was going on in his life in a series of kind of like little journal entries that he just mailed to his brother in Sierra Leone, because his brother is serving in the military, in the English military. He's a career military man at this point, and he's serving in Sierra Leone, and so his brother was sending him, various things that he'd been experiencing in his life at Oxford. And one of those was a mutual friend taking him to go meet the poet W.B. Yeats at Yeats's house. And he actually went and visited him 2 different times. And one of the funny things is I looked back on it that Lewis said about his first meeting as he was sharing the experience with his brother in letter. He said, I was quite shocked at how much just like his poetry the man actually is. Now, I've not read Yeats's poetry, or if I've been exposed to it, I just wasn't familiar that it was, I didn't know that it was Yeats. But I can only imagine, because it seems that he's talking about how magical and wild and crazy and otherworldly perhaps his poetry is, because that's what his first experience with the man was like. Let's see. So he talked about meeting him a second time, and he says it wasn't as bad. He seemed a little less crazy, but still crazy nonetheless. And then let's see. So he finished off, talking to his brother, asking him about what things were like in Sierra Leone, things like that. So the next letter we're jumping into is a letter that he wrote to his father. Lewis is writing from University College there within the Oxford University system. It's dated April 23rd. 1921. Lewis is, let's see, 21. He's going to turn 23 later in the year. So he's currently 22. His birthday's in late November. He has finished his first term at Oxford. He got essentially a perfect score in his first course of study, and now he's working his way into or through his second course of study there at Oxford. So here we go. My dear Pappy, I am sorry to hear that you have been unwell. If you have been having our weather, I am not surprised. Days of bright spring, alternating with frosts, biting winds, and snows, or often all these mixed in one day. It has indeed the charm of variety, but unlike that other variety, quote, custom can easily stale it. And here this is he's quoting William Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, and the actual quote that he's pulling from is, age cannot wither her, nor custom stale. So I think he's turning that a little bit to make his point that you can get tired of this kind of weather, even though it has a charm of variety to it. At least that's my interpretation. Any thoughts on that, Sandy? I usually say any thoughts on that, robot lady. So if I accidentally say that, Sandy, I apologize in advance.
I can. I'm the oldest, and I in my family, and I have been called many names. So yeah, I don't know exactly what his quote from Shakespeare, where it would have come from, but yeah, that's interesting. The
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Is
Go
his
ahead.
father under the weather for a while?
It seems that his father's been, going in and out of fits of unwellness here at this point. So I don't know how far away his father is from when he actually passes away. It doesn't seem that it's at that point of severity. It's just like coming and going. Like illnesses that I suppose are more frequent the older that you get. But it doesn't seem that anything is life threatening at this point. One of the things that did happen in our last reading, I think, was Lewis's tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick, passed away. Um,
Oh yeah,
yeah, just in the prior month in this timeline. So we're at April 23rd. I want to say it was like March 22nd that it happened. So he gave a brief note of it to his father, and I think he's going to write more about it in this letter, if I remember right. I did look ahead a little bit. All right. Sorry, I know we have a delay, so I'll pause if you want to say anything.
let you know.
Okay. Yeah, and feel
Keep
free to
reading.
interrupt. Here we go. On top of this, or rather arranged by some malicious power to coincide with the cold, comes the strike. And as Pepys says, quote, Lord knows what disorders we shall fall into. Once or twice it has looked like becoming a very ugly business, and on this subject you are the optimist to my pessimist, and I hope you are right. No doubt it was very wise of the government to call up the reserve, thus meeting at one stroke the unemployment and the results of unemployment. But these queues of volunteers, the lorries in the streets, and the uninformed figures are too unpleasantly familiar to most of us, and suggestive. What a good thing we drew our foot out of that net. So here he's referring to a coal strike that's going on, I suppose, in Ireland, I would suppose. But maybe it's going on across Ireland and just the broader United Kingdom, because in an earlier letter where he was writing to his brother, he was talking about how he has to saw his own wood and saw his own logs for fire as opposed to using coal. And he had a little funny account. I don't know if you got to listen to this, Sandy, whenever I read through it, but I didn't quite understand what I was reading while I was reading it. But after the fact, he essentially says to his brother, yeah, it seems like a simple task, right? You just run the saw through a log and then it splits in two and then you go throw it in the fire. And he says when one tries this, one has a rather different and frustrating experience. He said something like that. So that was a funny little account there. Um, so yeah, I do want to ask Robot Lady here a question, but before I do, Sandy, is there anything that you want to say about all that? I see that you were shaking your head. That from experience of trying to saw logs yourself, I would assume that it's not as easy as it
No, I have
sounds.
not. No, I have not. Well, I have tried the axe on no saws on the logs, but yeah, my family lives up north, and they have a log fireplace at their in their basement that
Hmm.
helps to complement their gas heating, and so yeah, I'm well familiar with heating with logs.
Okay. I want to ask Robot Lady. Actually, I'll ask you first in case you know who he's referencing here, because he quotes someone. He says, "As Pepys says," and it's spelled. It's a formal name. It's a capital P and then EPYS. I don't know who that is. Do you have any clue who that is, Sandy?
Um, I did look when you were saying it. They're set. Okay, I don't know if this is the same person he's referencing, but there was a Samuel Pepys in the 1600s who was an English writer
Okay.
and a Tory politician.
Oh, interesting. That must be, well, I shouldn't say must, but that very well could be who he's referring to. It would make sense. The quote was, "Lord knows what disorders we shall fall into." Now, I don't know the context of that or what Pepys was talking about, but Lewis thought it was apropos for this situation, so he pulled it out of his memory. It's funny. I can't remember who, but I've listened to or read a handful of biographies on C.S. Lewis, and there was at least one person, maybe a couple, who said that Lewis had this uncanny ability to just quote from any book that he had ever read, like to quote a line. And what I'm finding true is, yes, he does do that. And they also said, and he could do it from any language that he knew as well. Like if he read a book in German, he could pull the German quotation. If he read a book in Latin, he could pull the Latin. Now, those are all amazing feats. But what I'm learning as I'm working my way through his books, at least up until this age, whenever he's pulling quotes from various things that he's read, he butchers them a little bit. He gets them wrong because in the footnotes they'll pull the actual quotes, and it's just like, well, this is what he was trying to say, or this was kind of the quote that he was using.
Yeah. I'm looking down. I don't know where in this I could maybe find it. My eyesight's. I'm not as quick at finding the words probably as Robot Lady, but it says it's from the Diary of Samuel Pepys, Thursday, the 23rd of June, 1664. So I'm
Okay.
just trying to see if he got it correctly or not.
And I don't mean to give the impression that he's getting them completely wrong. Butcher was probably too strong of a word, but sometimes you'll go look at it and you'll be like, okay, that's kind of the gist. He's coming close to getting it right.
I don't know. I don't know. Hmm. He has several quotes in here where he says, "Lord knows this" or "Lord knows that," but
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if this is the one because you said something about falling, something if something falls.
Yeah, Lord knows what disorders we shall fall into is the quote.
Hmm.
Well, it's all right if you don't find it. Um, I'm gonna pick up because the next part is where he's talking more about his
Oh,
tutor here. He shifts the topic.
oh yeah.
He says, "I can of course appreciate your feelings about poor Kirk's funeral." And then here in the footnote it says, "The Lewises had long known that Mr. Kirkpatrick was an atheist. However, writing to Warney on the 21st of April, their father, Mr. Lewis, told Warney how painful he found the arrangements for Mr. Kirkpatrick's body. There was not to be a funeral." It's quoted from his father's letter to his brother Warney. "There was not to be a funeral, no service, no ceremony, no flowers, and he was to be cremated. My whole soul rose in revolt at the thought. The dear old man to be spirited away furtively, like an unclean thing, and burned." So that was a quote. Because Kirkpatrick was also the schoolmaster of the Lewis brothers' dad. So when the Lewis brothers' dad went to a
Goodness.
school somewhere in England when he was a boy, W.T. Kirkpatrick was the schoolmaster there. And so as he grew, they developed an affinity for each other. When Albert Lewis, their father, became an adult, they stayed friends. And then Lewis, after Kirkpatrick had retired from being a schoolmaster, he eventually went on to take on like one-on-one tutoring of bringing boys into him and his wife and his son's home, and he would do one-on-one tutoring. And so the oldest Lewis brother, Warney, went to Kirkpatrick first to try and prep for the various exams that he was going to have to take to get into, I forget the name of the school, but it's essentially the equivalent of the West Point Academy in the United States. I think it's called Sandhurst. Uh-oh, our signal is lagging. Hopefully you can still hear me. The
They were
video,
both very smart.
yeah, the video went out for just a second. So yeah, both of the Lewis brothers went to Kirkpatrick for some of their tutoring in preparation for university and scholarship application exams. And that seemed to be for C.S. Lewis. It seemed to be like kind of a turning point in his education, because he absolutely despised his boarding school experience. Lewis being much more of an introvert and not athletic at all and not very social. And there was just like a lot of, you know, expectations around, well, a couple of things around athletics, obviously, but then just also around like subservience into like the social order, you know, that was applied there. A lot of the older boys would kind of haze and bully and kind of try to bring you in line and align you with like the culture of what was going on there at the school and things like that. So he just hated it. And so they opted to move him out and sent him to W.T. Kirkpatrick. So anyway, that's just a little bit of the backstory. And if you go through the various episodes, I did cover some of the letters where they talk about that and the decision.
But it's interesting because he mentions he got, like 100% on, his exam
Mm-hmm.
in the first course. And you're mentioning how well he can draw from things he's read.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he must have been a very intelligent child, and to actually be able to be moved into an environment that would accommodate that and
Mm-hmm.
build on those strengths rather than,
So maybe
you know,
even
the
suppress them. Yeah.
yeah.
Or stifle them. Yeah. Lewis, it was like it was almost like an intellectual paradise to him. The ways that the younger Lewis was describing it in some of his letters of just having he had he had just like so much freedom to read and explore things that he was interested in. I mean, he did have a course of study, right? Kirkpatrick was preparing him with the various works and languages that he needed to be familiar with in order to, you know, pass the exams and do really well on them. But he was also free to, you know, explore all of, just to follow his interest outside of those studies.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's reference here to no funeral, and that's what Lewis is talking about here. So that was the footnote. So we'll read that sentence again, where Lewis is talking to his dad. He says, "I can of course appreciate your feelings about poor Kirk's funeral. Stripped of all wherewith belief and tradition have clothed it, death appears a little grimmer, a shade more chilly and loathsome in the eyes of the most matter of fact. At the same time, while this is sad, it would have been not only sad but shocking to have pronounced over Kirk words that he did not believe, and performed ceremonies that he himself would have denounced as meaningless. Yet, as you say, he is so indelibly stamped on one's mind, once known, so often present in thought, that he makes his own acceptance of annihilation the more unthinkable. I have seen death fairly often, and never yet been able to find it anything but extraordinary and rather incredible." I'm going to pause there because he's getting into another point. So I'll back up here, but I wanted to go to what he was saying earlier. He said, at the same time, while this is sad, it would have not only been sad, but shocking to have pronounced over Kirk words that he did not believe and performed ceremonies that he himself would have denounced as meaningless. So I find that very interesting. Like, they were essentially respecting the wishes of, you know, the man who had passed, and, well, he doesn't think all these things, so we're not going to go through a ceremony, you know, or do anything that he doesn't believe in or that he thought meaningless, kind of in a way to honor the person that was here. We're just going to say that's all that there was to it. It reminds me of a story about a football player who played in the NFL, named Pat Tillman. So I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Pat Tillman was a relatively successful player in the National Football League, I want to say for the Arizona Cardinals. And right around the time, I think I'm getting my timeline right. I want to say it was around the time of 9/11, but maybe not. He decided to leave football and sign up to be in the military and go fight in the war in Afghanistan. And he ended up passing away. He ended up dying in combat, actually. And I remember seeing some footage of his brother at his funeral, and he kind of took the same approach that they were taking with Kirkpatrick's funeral here. Now, they were having a funeral and like a ceremony honoring the life of Pat Tillman, but it's this very jarring speech that his brother gives, where his brother says something, and I guess his brother thought about it the same way that Kirkpatrick does, and that Pat Tillman, the guy who had died in service over in Afghanistan, that I assume he felt about all this as well. Like they were of the same mindset as Kirkpatrick, that that's it, I'm gone, there's nothing else. And his brother gave a very jarring speech, essentially saying that, of saying, Patrick, he knew that there was nothing after this, and there's nothing. My brother's gone. That's it. Or I would pull it up if I had if I thought I wouldn't crash our entire stream here. But that's what this reminds me of. And Paul Vanderklay has talked about that before. Nobody wants to go to a funeral and say, well, that's it. He's gone. There's nothing else. We all know that, right? Let's all nod our heads in agreement that this is it.
Mm.
All right.
I just looked his name up. It says his brother was behind in the convoy, but didn't. They were both in the same convoy in Afghanistan.
Oh, interesting.
He did not see it happen, and I'm like,
Okay.
oh, that would be even harder.
Mm-hmm. Does it say anything else there to kind of clean up my memory on the story?
Oh, Richard Tillman.
Actually, let me ask Robot Lady and see if she knows. Hey, Robot Lady. Sandy and I have a question for you. So I was just now remembering the former Arizona Cardinals player Pat Tillman, who left football and went into the military and died in combat. Do you know much about his story? And if you do, can you share what you know in about 50 words or less?
Pat Tillman was a former Arizona Cardinals player who enlisted in the U.S. Army after the September 11th attacks. He left a lucrative football career to serve and tragically died in combat in Afghanistan in 2004. His death initially involved misreported circumstances, which led to public scrutiny and reflection on his sacrifice.
Do you remember what his brother said about him at the funeral? I was telling Sandy just a few minutes ago that I remember his remarks being jarring, and I was reminded of it because as we were reading through C.S. Lewis talking about his tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick, not having a funeral because his family knew that he didn't believe, as Lewis said, in the things that would be pronounced over him and the ceremonies performed over W.T. Kirkpatrick, because Kirkpatrick would have denounced those things as meaningless. And I tied that to a memory of Pat Tillman's brother expressing similar sentiments at Tillman's memorial service. She's
And
responding.
hopefully
Yes,
she
at
edits.
Pat Tillman's memorial service, his brother, Kevin Tillman, made powerful and jarring remarks. He criticized the use of Pat's death for political purposes and expressed his anger over the circumstances surrounding his brother's death. Kevin said, while Pat was alive, he was a person of principle, integrity, and honesty. And in his death, we see an outpouring of public displays of reverence and respect. But let's be honest, none of this is real. Your comparison to C.S. Lewis's reflection on W.T. Kirkpatrick is striking. Both moments convey a deep sense of authenticity, where the individuals themselves wouldn't have wanted empty rituals or politically charged narratives surrounding their lives or deaths.
So it's sounding like his brother's was more about, you're using this, you don't really care about his death, you're using this for political purposes. But I feel like in the quote he had said something more about, like, he's dead, he's gone, there's nothing there, there's no like afterlife or anything like that. He didn't use those words exactly, but that's what I remember him implying. Was there anything like that, robot lady? And then Sandy, if you want to add to this after she goes, you can go ahead.
You're right. Kevin Tillman's remarks were about the politicization of his brother's death, but there was more to it. He expressed a sense of disillusionment, even about the idea of honoring Pat in a typical ceremonial way. He implied that Pat was gone, and there was nothing left in terms of an afterlife or divine meaning. His remarks were both critical of the way his brother's death was being used and a reflection of his own belief that death is final, with no supernatural continuation. It was a raw and poignant statement about the finality of death. Sandy, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything.
She's probably not going to read the quote because it has the F word in it.
You can edit it out if you want to.
I will edit that one word out. He basically said Pat isn't with God, he's dead. He told the 2,000 or so people. He wasn't religious, so thank you for your thoughts, but he's dead.
He's effing dead. Is that what he said?
But yeah.
Yeah, I thought I used the word jarring appropriately.
Yeah.
So maybe it's better that Kirkpatrick didn't have a funeral, because we get to see what could happen. Okay. I'll pick back up with where I was going. But yeah, I just wanted to circle in on that for just a moment. Now, Lewis, he was continuing here. He says, yet, as you say, he's talking to his father in this letter, Kirkpatrick is so indelibly stamped on one's mind, once known, so often present in thought, that he makes his own acceptance of annihilation the more unthinkable. I have seen death fairly often and never yet been able to find it anything but extraordinary and rather incredible. And I think of these words like in their deepest sense of meaning. Like extraordinary is like extraordinary. Like death is not normal. Like it's not something that's supposed to be here. Extraordinary and rather incredible, lacking, credibility. That's, the meanings that I'm kind of infusing into those uses right there. And then he says this. Lewis says, the real person is so very real, so obviously living and different from what is left that one cannot believe something has turned into nothing. And Lewis had had some very close exposure to death at this point, having everyone that he became friends with and went into the service with, all but one person died. And he got to witness, some of that death up front and personal. And then he says, it is not faith, it is not reason, it's just a feeling. And he's got feelings in quotes here. He says, feelings are in the long run a pretty good match for what we call our beliefs. I just think that's a fascinating reflection here that Lewis gives on death and on the real person and on how it just doesn't fit with how we feel about our experience with people, and especially those that we see die. It's just like, the closest that I've had happen to this is my father passed away, oh my gosh, 7 years ago now. And yeah, just seeing the person, seeing what was in that casket, that wasn't really him. That's not the real person. And it seemed like it did turn from something, I wouldn't say into nothing, but it was something other than him, if that makes sense. His lifeless body. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Sandy?
I've seen a lot of death. Three. I lost three grandparents when I was 12 within 6 months, and
Oh wow.
um, my one grandfather, we were at the hospital and got to see him in the hospital before him being taken away. And and yeah, I mean, I put some of the otherworldliness of the appearance of people down to, well, the work of the mortician. They do their best, but you aren't. But it's an empty shell
Mm-hmm.
that is there. Our life is actually in our spirit or our soul, and once that has gone, um, yeah, honestly, I've seen very, very different looks,
Mm-hmm.
on the people. They don't quite look like themselves.
No,
You
they
know, they
don't.
don't look vastly different. But they don't look like themselves anymore. Something of who they were is gone from their face, their whole body. Yeah, I think Lewis has captured. Like, I think he's pointing to that, even because he's not yet a Christian by any means at this age of life, and he's seen far too much for somebody who's almost 23.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's tough. It's tough to see so much death so young, but that is one of the things that sticks with you when you've seen somebody when they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, how do you describe it? Um, Feelings. That's one of the things that's missing in a way. I think is we interact with our feelings interact with the feelings of the person when they're alive, and once that's gone, it's like your feelings are homeless a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
How do you interact? Like, there's that question.
Yeah, that interaction, that unique interaction is gone, Um, yeah, yeah. One of the things that you said when you don't know the word, like the thing that kept jumping into my mind, even though this wasn't necessarily where you were going, was husk. It's like it's a husk, the actual body
Yep.
itself. Um, I don't know if they have these in Canada, but here in Texas we have cicadas, and they're these little insects that they I mean they're little husks. They're like shells, almost like how snakes, shed their skin. These things like come out of these little husks, and they like fly away. And they just leave these husks that are just like hanging on trees, or hanging on, like, we have a cover over our grill. You'll find these little husks, hanging there, particularly in the summertime. And that's what it feels like. It's like that something that was in there has flown somewhere else. And in the Christian story, the idea is, well, yes, it's not there anymore. The spirit, the nephesh, if you pull from the Hebrew scriptures, it's not actually in there. There's not that breathing in and out that's happening anymore. And in the Christian story, it's like somehow that comes back, and it revivifies, and it puts more there than was there before, taking into account the resurrection, and the resurrection of all people, all animals, all things, the restoration. And it's very hard to contend with whenever that idea, and I can very easily see why people have a hard time believing it. I have a hard time believing it, although I still say, it's something that I hope for. It is, like he says here, it's not faith, it's not reason, it's just a feeling. Feelings are in the long run a pretty good match for what we call our beliefs. I share this feeling with him that there's something weird, there's something not right about it. It seems like there's something that needs to be fixed there, and there's a hope that it will be fixed. I'm noticing that we have some of our regulars joining us in the chat, so I just wanted to say hi to Nidalate and to Ron, and Daniel's been here with us from the beginning today. And what Ron says in the chat is death is not part of our original nature. And Dan goes a little bit Pat Tillman's brother on us and says, damn sin. He didn't take it quite as far as Pat Tillman's brother, but all right, that's as far as he goes with that topic. He shifts to a new topic. So any closing thoughts on that before we move on to the next paragraph?
I do believe in resurrection. Um, I think in part because I've the scriptures themselves show people being brought back to life.
Mm.
There's I had that conversation with my son. Year I had to have my thyroid out and was super scared about the surgery. And I told him the story of Lazarus, and that these things happen in the Old Testament too. It said for now, even the people that were brought back, they will still go through death and wait for what's to come. But it's there. It's shows that it's happened. Can happen again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of excited to know what does God just breathe back into us again, or I have that curious mindset of I wonder how that happens.
Yeah, how's it gonna work? Yeah, that mystery.
Jeremiah and the dry bones, or
Oh yeah,
yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, yeah, that was a fascinating little piece there. Now to the more mundane. I have had a letter from Warney, probably stating much the same as he has written to you. He certainly seems very pleased with his new billet so far, and it must be a breath of home to find his office provided with a Lloyd's register and a telescope. Do you know what a Lloyd's register is, Sandy? I don't, so that's why I'm asking.
I'm thinking it must be like a list of somebody in the thing probably knows, but I'm thinking it must be like a list of Lloyd's Register, International Marine Shipping Classification. Interesting.
I mean, it sounds...
Ship design. So it looks like a book about everything you need to know about. What does the Lloyd's Register do? It's a class. Huh. Looks like they now, anyways, they work as safety class compliance across marine and offshore industries, enabling asset owners and operators to manage ships and offshore assets safely.
Okay.
Did Warney follow? I had one uncle who I don't know that he had autism. He'd had what's that brain disease babies get? Anyways, he was legally blind. But the one thing he did in Scotland, he stayed behind when the family came here, was he tracked everything about trains. He had every record you could possibly want to collect about trains. So I'm curious, like, was Warney a collector of information on ships shipping something? Would that relate to something like that?
I don't remember seeing anything about that. I just remember in an earlier letter, whenever Lewis was reflecting on the things that Warney was telling him, that he was fitted with and the things that he saw in Sierra Leone, it made Lewis think, oh, I didn't imagine that things like this really existed. I thought it was only in like our fanciful things that we came up with when we were writing stories about boxing and captains of ships in the Navy and things like that. So he thought it was kind of funny.
Lloyd's so there's Register. Some old floppy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because they would do like drawings and little schematics of I think they did one of a couple of ships, and so I suppose they were just fascinated to find those things existing in real life as he as he came across them in his travels.
Nice.
All right, he goes on to say about his brother, he is apparently reading Milton and the Old Testament, both, I fancy, works which enjoy a very limited circulation on the West Coast. He's talking, of course, about the west coast of Africa. I find that I am run pretty near the end of my tether by now and would be glad if you will put in the new money at once. We are hobbling along on wood fuel at present, but that is soon to be limited. Gas also is threatened, and with it presently electricity. If this lasts a month longer, England will be in a pretty state. No news of Optimist yet. Optimist is an essay that Lewis is working on to submit to a contest at Oxford to try and win. I forget the name of it. No news of Optimist yet. Apparently he has submitted it. And no man knoweth when it may be expected. So we can all enjoy our hopes undisturbed by facts for a while longer. Your loving son, Jack. I haven't tried digging into this, but I want to find this essay that he wrote called Optimist, or The Optimist, or On Optimism. But I haven't been able to find it yet. I've just done a couple of cursory Google searches, but if I can find it, I'll read it as a part of this project too. So that's the end of that letter. Sandy, any closing thoughts on that before we try to? The next one's short, so I think we can probably try for one more, unless you have to run.
Oh yeah. No, I'll be good.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I like that one. That was a fascinating look into Lewis's thoughts on death at this point in his life and on the afterlife. The next letter is also to his father, also written from University College, Oxford, dated May 9th, 1921. So this is about a month later, if I remember right. Let's go back and look. Yeah, almost exactly. No, not almost exactly a month. The last one was April 23rd, so a few weeks later. I'm bad with calendars, so less than a month. We'll say that, and that's accurate. My dear Pappy, I must apologize for having delayed till now to answer your letter and acknowledge, quote, the needful, for which, though belated, many thanks. And then he goes here, parenthetically, he says, that's a bad sentence. I mean, the thanks are belated, of course. A confusion that could hardly occur in any language except English. However, letters do not aim at literary precision. It seems almost a pity to have cashed the dividend. Such relics of civilization and commerce will soon have a historical interest if this country goes the way it is treading at present. Of course, it is not a question of wages. It is one side of the big underground movement which is working other troubles than those of labor at present. The most dangerous feature of the whole thing has developed since you wrote. I mean, quote, the sack of Aldershot, end quote, by the reservists with a red flag. And here we have a footnote to save us. It says here, the Times, dated May 9th, 1921 newspaper, says, quote, a riot which caused material damage and which, it is believed, was instigated by Bolshevists, sympathizers, in military uniform, occurred in Aldershot last night. The actual rioters may have numbered between 60 and 80. The party who marched with them under the red flag, it is estimated, numbered about 500. So interesting. That was, where did they say that happened? Was that in London?
Aldershot.
Oh, Aldershot.
No,
Where is Aldershot?
That's a good question.
Hello, Jer. I see you in the chat. Welcome. We're reading about a riot in Aldershot that was instigated or believed to have been instigated by Bolshevist sympathizers in military uniform marching under a red flag. And we're trying to figure out, Jer, where Aldershot is, because at least I am a dumb American and more broadly speaking, a dumb North American, but I'll keep it at American.
Okay. If you draw a straight line almost between London and Portsmouth. Whoops.
Okay.
Portsmouth.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, I see it right there.
I'm doing a terrible job. It's halfway along.
Okay, yeah, it's not too far. It's kind of south in between Oxford and London, so it's not too far from home for Lewis, or for what he calls home right now. Okay, so he goes on to say about this little event, the levity of English people is incorrigible and encouraging. Most of the men I have met take the view, having been at Aldershot during some period of their soldiering, that the sooner it is all destroyed, the better. As our friend at the Hippodrome says, quote, I won't go back to Aldershot, end quote. The Hippodrome, I think, is a place back in Belfast where they go to plays and various shows and stuff. So I don't know exactly who he's referencing here, but apparently it's a shared sentiment that Aldershot isn't worth a darn to some people. All right. Yeah, and Jer says here in the chat that he thinks that Aldershot is a military town. So I guess that would make sense if that's the only purpose that it serves, that some people are just like, yeah, let's just be done with it. We don't want it anyway. He transitions into another topic. He says, I am beginning my period of Roman history, and this has sent me back to Tacitus, whom I read with Kirkpatrick. It is the strangest and, in a way, the pleasantest sensation. The old phrases come up inevitably in his own voice and manner. Here we are again, back to the person not being able to leave us after they've left this plane. They still live in our memory and somehow inside of our heads. That's me. That's not Lewis saying that. Let me go back to what he's actually saying. The old phrases come up inevitably in his own voice and manner, not only by the usual force of association, but also because Tacitus is a grim, sardonic author whose hardest sayings Kirk relished and made into his own. One seems to remember those days in the little upper room with the photograph of Gladstone and the gas stove, all the more often now that they are absolutely finished and shut up. So yeah, still some reminiscing about his old tutor now that he's passed. All right, shifting to the weather now. We have to move to another topic to write an appropriate letter full of everything that it's supposed to have. The weather continues pretty cold here, and there are still a good many soldiers passing to and fro. I don't know what the colonel's letter to me was I don't know that the colonel's letter to me was very discursive. The Lloyd's Register in his office and his dislike of the natives and cockchafers were the chief points. So the colonel, of course, is the nickname he gives to his brother Warnie. But for the climate, it would not be a bad job for troglodytes and readers like ourselves. Fortunately, he has a streak of that in him. For the average officers with no mind and no resources, it must be a terrible business and a nurse of all the solitary vices. It is curious necessity that always casts these sort of jobs, lighthouses, wireless stations, etc., on the men least fitted for them by nature. So I think what he's saying is for jobs and stations that are very mundane, it leads a certain type of person towards nursing and encouraging their vices, or encouraging, just general vices of humanity. But I think he's saying that his brother Warnie is lucky in that, he can actually get caught up in books to read and other things to occupy his time with. He goes on to talk about his essay Optimism here. He says there's still no news on optimism, and by now, little optimism among those who await the news. I should have thought that they could have decided on the productions before this. An unsettled possibility like that becomes, in the end, a nuisance at the back of one's mind. Your loving son, Jack. So there you go. A couple of letters to his dad that are illuminating, and it was nice to be able to read. What do you think, Sandy?
Well, I think at 22, he's doing pretty well sending all of his thoughts and writings out there for different opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. He had a similar experience when he was waiting on his poems, his book of poetry that we finished off together, Spirits in Bondage, to be published, because it's like he sent it off and he was, he got the approval, and they agreed to terms and all this kind of stuff, and then there was just this really long waiting game. And it seems like he's going through that same pattern again, and he's the way that it's affecting him and the way that he's writing about it is almost in the exact same pattern as it was when he was waiting for his book to be published. So that's kind of interesting. All right, Sandy, any other closing thoughts before we shut it down today?
No, just thank you for letting me jump in with you and explore a little bit of the background of the reading through it. So
sure thing.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, and thanks for volunteering. Thanks for reaching out. The fact that you reached out made it easier for me to get it all set up and prepared, because I decided not to stream to any of the other platforms today because I didn't think my machine was going to be able to handle it if I tried that. So hopefully that has paid off, and everybody who's watching on YouTube has not experienced anything beyond just a little bit of the lag that we've seen here. But it's not as bad, it seems, as it was last time when we tried it, Sandy. So
no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me just see if there's anything in the chat here. Logos has dropped something in there. He says, I thought in some more recent letters to Warney, he was more waspish about his dad, but the letters are very chatty. Yes, he's a little bit more guarded and just trying to keep the waters calm in these letters to his dad right now. They've had a dust up in the past. I think I said in the last episode that there's a thumbnail out there, if you look back, that I said Lewis attacks his father. I think I was remembering that wrong. It's not attacks his father. It was, what was it? It wasn't as severe as that. It's something like he's honest with his father, or he tells his dad the truth or something like that, where he basically told his dad, yeah, I don't trust you. I'm not going to share details about my life. Oh, deceives his dad. That's what I ended up calling it. So yeah, if you want to read about the little confrontation that he and his dad had, and some of the things leading up to that, you can start with that episode. I think it's episode 87, and then you can work your way backwards and see kind of the fact that his dad never came to visit him while he was convalescing after his war wounds, where he was in hospital or in a hospice, or not hospice. Sorry, that's a different thing. In a convalescence home, either that or a hospital. And his dad never left Ireland to come visit him, and so I think that hurt C.S. Lewis quite a bit. So anyway, but yes, your point is well taken, Jer. That he's a little bit more. Has a little bit more bile for his father when he is writing letters to his brother, because I think that's the only person who can understand where Lewis is coming from that he has in his life at this point. But yeah, it's a little more sedate as he's talking to his dad. But in later biographies, Lewis has said that there are several things that he hadn't forgiven his father for, that it took him like years to eventually be able to reach, true forgiveness in his heart. So, yeah, so that's it. Nidalade says, great session to the three of us, me, Sandy, and Robot Lady. Robot Lady, I've not bothered her with having to listen to us anymore, so I'll leave it at that. We'll say goodbye for now to Robot Lady. I'm sure she'll make another appearance at some point. But thanks again, Sandy, for joining, and thanks everyone else for joining online. This is where I will end it. So until next time, when I continue, I always say my read on C.S. Lewis. It's turning into our read on C.S. Lewis. So until then, take care.
Sit late, beats, get on my face. books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's land.